But first, I want to back up for a moment to what I said at the very beginning about how storytelling is universal. The way in which we tell a story is on a subconscious level how we want a story to be told to us. Here's a non-film example. How many times have you been told a story like this? So you're never going to believe what happened to me today. I almost got killed on my way to work. Driving along, not more than a couple blocks from the house, when I notice something isn't right. I think I might have a flat tire, so I pull over to check, and as I open my door, a car hits me. So the driver pulls over and tells me it's my fault. My driver's side door was open, and I tell him I was pulled over, was getting out of my car. You should have been paying attention. So we continue to argue, and the driver tells me I need to pay him for the damage to his car. So I stop arguing and assess the damage. I tell him fine. To avoid increased insurance, let's just both get an estimate and pay for it out of pocket. But that's when he tells me that's a sign of my guilt. That gets me angry. I'm just trying to be civilized about it. So I turn around and tell him, you know what? I don't like your attitude. Forget it. I'll see you in court. Now, what's so special about that story? Nothing in particular, except that it mirrors very closely the way in which a story might unfold on screen, and that specifically hitting upon the structure we just discussed. Part 1, the setup. I begin with the hook. I tell you I almost got killed today. I establish a tone right away. Then I back up to establish the world, as it were, of my story, driving on my way to work, discovering the flat tire. Then the point of attack. A car sideswipes me. The transition, acclimating to my new situation, and begin to argue with the driver about whose fault it is. Now moving on and looking at part 2, the predicament of my story, starting with the refusal of the call. I give up fighting. I attempt to settle the issue by suggesting that we deal with the matters, which prompts my opponent, the antagonist in the story, to insinuate that I'm admitting guilt. So then I allow the story to survive. I re-engage the argument. I keep the story going instead of ending it right there. I stand up to him and I face that last big obstacle, in which I tell him, I'll see you in court. This in effect becomes the Act 1 tension, the first plot point established, that would otherwise lead the story into new territory if it were to carry on into Act 2. Now, without telling you any more than what you know, it's clear where my story is going, what it's about, and where it might be headed in the future. At this point, the listener could walk away with a clear understanding. This relates back to what I mentioned earlier about the necessity of clarity. You don't want your readers second-guessing what's happening. Make them want to read on. Providing you with this non-film example story is relevant because now you begin to see how important structure is. It should not be construed as a way of boxing in your ideas, but rather a blueprint to properly and effectively work through your story to discover what's really at stake. Subconsciously, people want a story to unfold a specific way, a familiar but different way. What does that mean? That means presenting the material in a manner that is easy to digest, but not easy to figure out. It's using the narrative components discussed successfully as principles, and then disguising the quote structure and making it feel fresh, so that it qualifies the unique story you're trying to tell. Now let's look closely at each narrative component discussed in a bit more depth.